Hi, everyone. Welcome to Thanks for Sharing. I am your host, Jackie Pack, and I am happy to have you with me today. As you can tell, maybe you can't tell because some of it's on the ground, some of it's on the couch, but you can see these bar stools behind me. One of my daughters who recently graduated, she graduated in April, is moving out. And she started talking about it. She started talking about moving out probably 2 weeks ago. She was mentioning it to my husband. I was still at work. And at the time she was thinking of moving, she was thinking she wanted to get an apartment and have daughter number one, who just recently graduated with her MSW, be her roommate. But then she decided she just wanted to live on her own. She didn't want to have a roommate. She's excited to be an adult. And with her job, she's making enough money that she felt like she could afford to live on her own. And she's never done that. She did tell her sister, daughter number one, that she should totally move out, move into the same apartment complex, and they could be neighbors, but she wanted to live alone. So we'll see. Daughter number one wants to move out. She moved home after breaking up with a boyfriend. They were living in Colorado, and she was in an online MSW program. So I told her, look, move home. You have your internship to do, which is going to take time. You have school. You don't necessarily need to get a job. She was able to get an internship here in Utah that did pay working as an intern. And I said, just stay at home, focus on school, focus on finishing your internship. She had a little less than a year to finish. She recently graduated and finished her MSW. The school doesn't hold graduation until December. So we will fly down she's graduating from the University of Louisville. And so we will fly down in December and do the graduation thing. So when I got home from work and my husband told me that they had plans to move out, let me back up. So daughter number four had told us maybe 2 months ago that a few of her coworkers have a townhouse that they all share up in Park City. And daughter number four, works in Park City at a really cool coffee shop on the old Main Street part of Park City. And their lease was expiring in November, and one of the roommates was going to move out. So they were looking for a new roommate, offered it to daughter number four, and she decided that she's going to move in. That won't be until November, but we knew she was going to be moving out with her chocolate lab, June. I was wondering how June's going to do because June is high level obsessed with my husband. And he now works remotely, totally from home, unless he's traveling for work. She was already high level obsessed with him before he switched jobs and started working completely from home. I think she believes that he switched so that he could spend more time with her. So I don't know how she will do moving out. We brought that up to daughter number four, and she said, I am not going to live with you guys for the rest of June's life, though. So June's going to have to adjust, which totally agree. So she will be moving out in November. Daughter number three actually moves out in just a couple weeks. She got an apartment. She looked at several, looked at it, loved it, applied, and has put her deposit down and everything. So hence the furniture that she's putting in my office until she moves out. Initially, she was saying, I don't need anything to move out. I just need my bed. I don't need to have anything else. And we said, well, you might want to have a few things, pieces of furniture, stuff like that. So she has started getting stuff, buying some stuff old, buying some things new. And yeah, my office has become the storage place for all of the things she's buying until she moves. Hence the messy background. After she had announced that daughter number three, that she was going to move, we already knew daughter number four was going to move. One night, my husband and I were talking, and he said, I'm really sad that they're all going to move out. I'm going to miss them. And I was listening and he said, "Aren't you really sad?" And I said, "No, not really. I have had children for 29 years. I am so ready to be an empty nester." I imagine, I said to him, our girls are loud. Daughter number three, particularly, raises the noise decibel at least 3 levels. And I love that they're laughing and they're joking and they're whatever. It's not that they're fighting, it's just that they're so loud and they have been loud their whole life. And I said, I'm just ready to just have you become home at the end of the day. They haven't made a mess, they haven't made food or something and not cleaned up after themselves. Our fridge is finally going to have the room that we need it to. It seems like our fridge is always jam packed, and it's one of the largest fridges we've ever owned. So I told him, no, I will enjoy going on walks with you in the evening, just the two of us, not because we have to walk June and not have our kids come along. Not that I mind that. I told him our kids aren't moving to another state. One of them's moving less than 10 minutes away. So I'm sure we will still see them. Park City's 20, 25 minutes away from us. So that will be the furthest one of them is moving away. I'm sure we will still see her plenty. So I'm going over my list of the benefits of being empty nesters. And I think I did persuade him. He hasn't brought up that he's so sad that they're moving out. And I love my kids. I absolutely love my kids. But I'm ready to be an empty nester. And I am super excited about that. I got a new inhaler that's a stronger inhaler for my asthma. I feel like since I had that upper respiratory issue earlier this year, which got much bigger than it needed to because of my asthma, I feel like my asthma has never quite come back under control and that I've been able to manage. I've talked to my doctor about it several times. He finally said, let's start a different inhaler that has a steroid and that has some other thing that both help lessen inflammation and open my bronchial tubes or my lungs. I don't know, whatever. So I've been using it a couple of days so far. I do catch myself breathing and I'm like, oh, I haven't taken that type of deep breath in a while. So breathing feels different to me, which you talk differently when you're breathing very shallow. And I feel like I haven't been able to get deep breaths lately. So I'm supposed to take it for a week or every day for a week. And then as needed after that, or when it's bad. In Utah, we get some really bad air pollution in the summertime. We get bad pollution in the wintertime. But in the summer, when it gets really hot along the Wasatch Front, we also get some pretty bad air pollution. And that really affects my asthma. So I'm not sure what is still lingering from what should have been the mild respiratory issue this past spring that was not mild for me. And this season of allergies and poor air quality. So anyway, I'm hoping it's a noticeable difference in my ability to breathe, which I would imagine you may not have noticed. A lot of the times I'm coughing is an asthma cough. When I'm coughing, I've edited that out or cut that out, but there might be a bit different sound to my voice because I can fully breathe. Yay. So now that I've told you what's going on with me, let's get into today's episode. I want to introduce today's topic. So this is a phrase that I came up with a while ago as a therapist. I don't think it was taught to me. I think it came from my own learning and my own process of understanding and having more self-awareness and different things like that. But I talk about it with clients. I've talked about it in groups that I run, and it can shift something deep for clients. And that is this concept that adults don't get in trouble. At first, when I say that, let's say in a group that I'm running, one of our men's recovery groups that I'm running, and I'll say that as they're talking about something, sometimes with their partner, it's a conversation they have with a parent or something like that. And they're checking in with group and sharing what's coming up for them. And sometime during that group, I will talk about this concept that adults don't get in trouble. And they side eye me at first. Some of them are like, I don't believe that. That's not my experience, which I'm fine with the pushback. I get that it takes some time to think about it and let yourself integrate that in a way that provides that deeper shift. It sounds like a simple concept that actually has deep roots into some of our earlier experiences in life that are still showing up as an adult. I've also talked about it long enough with clients that once they really start to understand it, things change. Often I will tell clients, I think there's some learning that can happen or awareness that you can have early on in your recovery journey or in your healing journey. And then you cycle back and you have a deeper understanding of that same concept, and then go forward and there's a deeper understanding of that concept. So I think people experience this particular concept on multiple layers depending on where they are in their recovery journey. But it is something that when they hear it, it's not that they don't understand what I'm saying. They will typically express to me, that is not my experience. And when we're talking about it, and let's say they've been talking about a conflict that happened with their spouse, and I've shared that adults don't get in trouble, and they don't really understand that. Maybe they've heard me say it already, but they're still saying that does not make sense for me and my experiences, or even how I feel in that moment. I totally understand it not feeling that way in that moment. But I'll say to them, well, what is your partner going to do? Are they going to ground you? Are they going to take away the car privileges? To me, that's what getting in trouble is. It's a very childhood experience, whether that's from your parents, whether that's from a school teacher, whether that's from a neighbor or a friend's parent. Throughout our childhood and our teen years, we have an experience of getting in trouble. So I want to talk about what I mean when I say this, how that very shame from our childhood impacts our adult responses, and how we can grow into functional adults who don't live in fear of getting in trouble or react as though they're getting in trouble. I will say this isn't just something I notice with addicts. Like I've had these conversations with my clients who are a partner. I've had these conversations with my clients who aren't dealing with addiction issues, but are healing from childhood trauma. So while I do think it applies to addicts and partners, I don't think it's only specific to them. One of the things I often hear if I'm working with partners is that they'll have an awareness that can be helpful for them to put a context around their spouse's reactions or behaviors when there's conflict present. And they often report, I feel like I'm trying to have this conversation with my partner and they just disappear. Yeah, they revert back to a younger age. This is not the functional adult that you thought you married, or that's not them right now, because that experience of being in trouble is a younger experience. And so they're reverting back to something earlier in life. It's not in the present. I mean, it is in the present in that the conflict is in the present, but their response or their reaction is much younger. So let me talk a little bit more about why getting in trouble is a childhood experience. I did an episode a little bit ago on healthy parenting. And I know what it was. It was the concept of gentle parenting and some of the things that are misunderstood about gentle parenting Gentle parenting isn't about never setting consequences for your children or never getting upset at them. You can do that in healthy ways. Having consequences is not necessarily a bad thing. Now, maybe your parents went to an extreme with consequences. I think my parents went to an extreme with consequences, but that doesn't mean that it has to be. So I think if that was your experience with your parents, you could be likely to overcorrect and go to no consequences. The child gets to lead and they can never do anything wrong. Well, that's not going to teach the child how to grow into functional adulthood. And they might have some entitlement. They're going to have a sense of power running the family or having the family operate around them. That will get in the way of their healthy development. Or you might, if your parents went to extremes with consequences and punishments, you may just replicate that and do the same thing, seeing that, yeah, this is how you raise a child. And it might be how some people raise children. I don't think it's a healthy way of raising children. And so I do think that getting in trouble is going to be a childhood experience. It's going to be a teenage experience. But that doesn't mean it has to become a crippling experience or something that they don't start to grow out of as they step into the older teen years and the adult years. I think one of the common things, whether that was for me or my clients in their childhood, there are certain rules. And sometimes there's explicit rules that are spoken, and sometimes there's non-explicit rules that aren't spoken, but everybody knows. Let me give you an example of that. I've talked before about in my family, there was a lot of dysfunction happening. There was a lot of fighting between my dad and my mom that got out of control. There were issues between my dad and the kids. There were issues between my mom and the kids. So my house was not really a safe place to be, and there wasn't a lot of predictability about what could move into something that was really big. There wasn't a lot of consistency. We also, as kids, did not talk about it. And I don't recall that ever being spoken. Don't tell other people, don't tell the neighbors what's going on, don't tell people at church what's going on. I don't recall that ever being told to us. That was one of those nonverbal rules that we all knew, and we all hid that, and we hid it very well. I was talking to one of my cousins last weekend. I had mentioned before I had a barbecue with my uncle who had politically deconstructed, religiously deconstructed, and 4 of his 5 kids came. None of his kids are active in any religion, let alone the religion that my uncle brought him up in. And my aunt and uncle had a divorce. It started in 89, wrapped up in 90. It was a longish divorce and somewhat contentious divorce, complicated situation. My aunt is actually my blood relative. She's my mom's younger sister. And I would say I don't know that it was a midlife crisis. I think she had an identity crisis of who she was, and she's still hard to talk to. I will interact with her when I see her. I'm not planning a barbecue and having her over like I do my uncle now, but I do see her at least once or twice a year, and I'll talk to her. Sometimes she texts me about different things throughout the year, and I don't have a problem engaging with her, but she has not been the same since the process of starting their divorce and then getting divorced and the bomb that she blew up in their family. Her oldest child is 9 years younger than me. And I have felt as an adult that I don't think he's ever said this to me, but I get the feeling from him that he feels like I'm too much. And so if I see him, we're friendly. I say hi, we talk about things. He'll give me a hug. I give him a hug when we see each other or when We're leaving. He actually works up at the University of Utah, where daughter number two works. And when she first started up there, he saw her and knew exactly which of my kids it was and called her out by name. And it took her maybe a minute or 30 seconds to recognize my cousin. And occasionally, if he sees her, he's an adjunct faculty in the same department that she is, an assistant to the dean. And I think he had texted me and told me that he had seen my daughter at the U and that he didn't know that she worked there. And then on her way home from work, she called me and was like, guess who I saw at work today? So I feel like we are pleasant with each other. We're nice, but I also get this feeling like I'm too much. I don't know why, but I just have that feeling. And at this barbecue, I got a different feeling from him. He was wanting to talk to me. And I knew my sister and her husband wanted to talk to me after everybody left. Last year when we did it, they had all left around 10. And I think my sister and my one brother, they had come with their families. They stayed for another hour and a half. And then one of those late night rainstorms moved in, and that's what broke up the party that night. My sister and her husband were expecting the same thing, and I was too. But this cousin seemed like he wanted to talk to me. And he brought up, and he has three daughters. And so he had brought up to me, he had said, I am struggling. He posts on Facebook. It seems like he is a good dad. He does a lot of one-on-one things with each of his daughters, spends some one-on-one dad and daughter time. And it seems like he was interested and is an active parent in their life. His wife is too, but I was just talking about my cousin. And so he mentioned to me, his oldest is 13. And he said, I've really struggled to keep my connection to my daughter since she hit puberty. And I said, oh, how come do you think that is? And he said, well, I think it's the puberty. And so we started talking about that and how I navigated that with my daughters. And I did tell him it's different with each of them. It depends on their personality. A relationship is going to be different based on what they're interested in. He said, when they were younger, I knew that I needed to be present, that I needed to take an active interest and help them, teach them that type of stuff. And he said, I think I still need to be present for her during the teen years and then the two that come after. But he said, you're not as open. Sometimes I chuckle. He's like, I had no idea how much I chuckle at things. I don't even know why. But my 13-year-old is hyper focused on that. And if I do that, she completely shuts down and I can't get her to open up again. So I told him part of my philosophy with the teen years, like present is good. Being present is always a good thing as a parent. But I think during the teen years, there's so much more emotional things that are needed. And I didn't raise any sons. You're not raising sons. And so I said, I would imagine it's similar for boys. I think boys still needs emotional attunement. It probably looks different for them than girls, for sure. And I was asking him, what is she interested in? He said, I also think parenting during the teen years, you get a lot more curious and you ask more questions. If you are lecturing them, they're really good at tuning that out. Even if they're acting like they're listening, they're not. And so it's not actually building your relationship. And he had also asked me about, how did it come up? He had asked me, what if you're just asking them their thoughts on something, you're just getting curious, but their thoughts haven't fully been developed? How do you step in and develop that? And I said, well, I think you have to take a long view. Your daughter's thoughts and how she views things at 13 is not going to be the same way that she views that at 15 or 17 or 20 or 21. So I think you have to take that long view instead of the short-term view, the long-term view of this will evolve. I told him, not 100% of the time. I'm not 100% of the time great parent. I don't think I was ever a horrible parent. I think you have to hit good enough parenting. I think more often than not, you're framing it in a question. Well, what about this perspective? Or, oh, what if somebody thought this? So you're trying to guide their thinking, sure, but also let them think and let them share that. And that gives you a glimpse into their development, but also don't get too worried about what their thought process is at 13. Like 13's young. And their their perspective or their opinions or their thought process is going to evolve as they continue to get older. And keep the conversations going, get curious. I asked him, does she like to read? And he said, oh, yeah, she loves to read. And I said, read the book she reads. There's some great young adult fiction books series that both me and my husband read. Some of the series he read at the time our kids were reading them, and others I read. And many times we both read the series. But you can ask, what do you think of this character? Who's your favorite character? Which character do you not like? And you don't have to offer your opinions. You're just asking them what their thought process is about the book, about the development, about the characters. So we had started with that conversation. And then I don't even remember how it pivoted into his own childhood experiences. I think he had offered and said things started unraveling in their marriage when I was 9 and they divorced when I was 10. And he said, that really had an impact on me. And his dad got married a year or two after the divorce was finalized. And she had the majority of custody with her kids. My uncle had the majority of custody with his kids. So he had 5 kids, she had 4. And he said, Craig and Marcia were spread so thin. There was a lot that I could get away with. We could all get away with things because they were spread so thin, which that's true. I knew that at the time. And they did get into trouble. He said, my dad knows most of it now. It's not like I'm keeping it a secret from him now. But he said they were just too many kids for them to keep an eye on that. And that's a reason it's important to me that I have a good relationship with my kids. And so he started talking about his parents' divorce. And I was a pretty present person in his home when he was young. And there were some things about the divorce that impacted me and that were going on for me that I never knew if he knew. I didn't know if he'd been told. And up until last weekend, we really didn't have an opportunity for me to ask him about it or bring it up and talk about it. And so I asked him some of those questions. I asked him, do you remember your family coming down where I was at college when I was 19? And I would have been 19, 20 when these things were happening. And he said, no, I don't. And so I was telling him about it. They came down to visit me at college, and I knew that things were not okay with your mom and dad's marriage. And I knew that they might be moving towards divorce, but that wasn't for sure decided yet. I said, I remember coming over to the hotel you guys were staying at. I was going to hang out with your family for the day. And your mom and dad disappeared. They would have had all 5 kids at that point. I only remember him and the brother who was 18 months younger than him. He would have been 9 and then, well, 7.5 maybe. And I said, they disappeared. I assumed they went back to the hotel room and were fighting. And they left me the 2 oldest. Maybe the 3rd one was there. I don't recall. The youngest would have been a year or so. And then the other one would have been 3. So they could have taken him back to the hotel room. And I didn't know how long they'd be. So we went, the hotel had this floor that had a foosball table and a pool table and a ping pong table, maybe. They had 3 things. And so we went there and hung out and played games. And he looks at me and he's like, wait, I remember that. He said, I didn't know that was you. And I said, yeah, that was me. And so we started talking about that time period. I could offer him the little bit that I knew from my perspective. And I probably knew too much because my mom did share too much. I think she shared too much with us as kids. That she probably, if her and my dad had a good relationship, she would have shared more of that with him. We might have known some things, but not all things. We knew a lot of things that probably had she had a available partner, we would not know so much. So we were talking about that and his experience. And he asked, why did your parents get divorced? Like, I don't know that any of my cousins have ever asked me that. I don't know what they knew. Pretty much the whole family knew about the issues in his parents' marriage and what was going on during the divorce. But my parents were married during that time, but nobody knew about that. And so I was explaining some of the things that led to my parents' divorce. And he said to me, I have two memories of your dad. And they weren't really direct memories. One, we had a really heavy snowstorm and they lived up on the hill in a city close to where I grew up. And they had a couple of three-wheelers. And we went and up in the mountains above their house. And he said, your dad was driving one of the three-wheelers all day. And I remember that. I don't recall my dad being there, but sure, maybe he was. And I don't recall what the other memory was that he had of my dad, but nothing direct, like a conversation with my dad. And he said, I don't even know if I can picture your dad. I'm pretty sure he had really dark hair. And I said, yeah. And I think he had glasses. And I said, yeah. And he said, that's as much as I remember about him. He was 9 years younger than me. So do the math. If I'm 23 when my parents separate, 24 when their divorce happens, he's still fairly young, 13, something like that. I can't do math on the spot. And he shared these struggles with his mom. He said, sometimes I am overwhelmed. Like I need to be doing more to try to develop a relationship with my mom. But he said, then I'm around her and I cannot talk to her about the divorce. He said, I can talk to my dad. My dad will acknowledge it's been 30 years. So my memory may not be as sharp. And this is my perspective. I can tell you what your mom's perspective was, but I may not have known all of her perspective. He said, my dad can talk about that with all of us in normal ways and take accountability or at least acknowledge this is his perspective or this is his memory today. It's been a while, but this is his memory. And he said, but my mom, if I try to talk to her at all, he said she just goes silent, gets a look in her eyes and says, I'm not going to talk about that. And he said what she does want to talk about is the evils of patriarchy and how horrible men are. And I told him when I was away at college, my first year at college, she sent me 2 books. She was sending me articles about feminism. And I knew that her version of feminism was pretty caustic and harsh, and she hated men. I think it was in one of my last episodes that I recorded without a guest. I had mentioned that when I got engaged, she had asked to see my apartment, and I took her by myself, and she told me how disappointed she was that I was getting married. Thought I would do more with my life than that, and that basically I was giving up my life and who I am, which was not my perspective at all. And years later, I want to say we were married probably 15 years. And I was standing by my husband and we were at some family party that she was at. And she came to my husband and she said, Jeff, I think you're one of my favorite males. What do you say to that? Right? He's standing there and he's like, oh, well, that's good. And he kind of laughed and she was like, no, honestly, like, I don't really like a lot of men. And he was like, okay, she can be weird like that. I would say that I consider myself a feminist. Not that I had ever talked to my cousin about that, but I had wondered because I knew his mom's version of feminism because She wrote me letters. She sent me books. She sent me things, and each one had a letter with her point of view. And I knew her version of feminism. And later, as I continued to get older, still in college, I had read some of the actual classic feminists like Betty Friedan and Gloria Steinem and their works, and realized, oh, yeah, feminism isn't hating men, and it doesn't come at the cost of men or even marriage, which was good news to me. So we had that conversation when he was telling me the only thing my mom talks to me about is the evils of patriarchy and the evils of men. And I said, that must be so hard because you are her son and you're a man. And he said, yeah, it's one of those things where I feel guilt not having a better relationship with her. But I also realize it's not just on me to have a better relationship. I told him how I knew his mom's version of feminism. She had given that to me when I was 19 and 20 years old. And that later I had read other people and realized she had a unique take on feminism that wasn't necessarily feminism. And I shared a couple of stories about my parents' marriage. He was sharing stories about his parents' marriage and how he struggles as an adult to have a relationship with his mom. I told him I struggled with my dad. He really wasn't there, told him some stories. And my sister and brother-in-law, they had left. All my kids had gone to bed. My husband was inside. It was just him and I sitting out on the backyard. It was a nice night. And we were sitting out on the patio furniture. We have some garden lights that had come on, and we just sat and talked and shared our experiences and talked about the impact of our childhood on both of us. Towards the end of the conversation, I had mentioned that I don't recall if it was after the divorce or towards the end of the divorce, his dad would, during the summer, because my mom was a school teacher, and his dad would bring the kids over and we'd watch them for the day. And he said, oh, yeah, day trips to Aunt Susan's house. I loved day trips to Aunt Susan's house. He said, those were highlights for me during a very dark time. He said, I knew I got to hang out with Becky, who's my younger sister and is probably 2 years older than him. And he said, I'm sure Jer was there. That's my youngest sibling, Jeremy. But he said, I remember Becky and loving to hang out with her. And then he said, it sounds like your home wasn't always a safe place for you. And I'm sorry about that, but I have only good memories about that. And I said, yeah, I think that's normal. That's fine. Me not having a home that always felt safe to me doesn't mean that on those days it wasn't a really safe place for you. Also, my dad would not have been home because it was during the week. And he laughed and he said, I don't know. I do feel like my childhood was very impactful. And I have a lot of trauma to work through. But it sounds like yours was worse. And I said, I don't think that's how trauma works. What we know is trauma impacts people differently, but it disconnects you from who you are and the course that you would organically go through your life without the trauma. And I said, and especially when it happens in childhood, it's happening while we're developing. It's there in our development. So I don't think we can compare traumas and say, oh, this trauma was worse than this trauma. We know that that doesn't work. And I said, I also remember on those days when you guys would come to our house. And I shared a story with him of his 4-year-old brother and how he would come and sit in this corner behind a big music speaker we had in the front room. And he would sit there facing the wall and hide behind there the whole day. I remember going over there and I'd talk to him. And after a time period, he would talk to me, but he would never turn around and look at me. We'd take him his lunch and set it next to him. And He'd eat it, he'd take the plate away. That was just heartbreaking. And I said, but it wasn't just him. That is one of the visual stories that I have. But I also think I saw it on your faces because I had several conversations with my mom telling her, this is damaging you guys. I'm watching this damage and it's damaging you guys right now. I don't think I had the word traumatizing them, but now I would say I was literally watching the impact of trauma change them. But at the time, I just knew damaging. And so I would talk to my mom about it. It was upsetting to me, it was distressing to me. And my mom would say, Jackie, we can only do what we can do. We can give them a good day when they're here, which she was right. That's true. And so I shared that with him, and he was like, yeah, you guys did. You did that for us. And then he said, I didn't know that you knew about my trauma. I never heard anybody talk about your trauma or even why your parents got divorced. And I said, yeah, we were pretty good at hiding it and not letting people know, even after the divorce. Nobody asked us, but I don't know how we would have answered that because we kept those secrets for so long. And I was probably one of the first ones who started breaking that rule of speaking about what our home was like. So I think for children, the experience of getting in trouble, having punishment has to do with breaking rules, again, spoken or non-spoken, getting punished. It's about not being obedient and doing it exactly the way your parents want you to. And it's usually about higher authority or an authority that's external to us as a child. And getting in trouble becomes associated with fear, with shame, with disconnection from self, and sometimes dissociation. I think those experiences of getting in trouble, as any childhood trauma does, I will say the childhood trauma is either what happens to us that should not as kids, or what didn't happen for us but should have. So it can be neglect and the things that didn't happen. That one's harder to see because there's nothing to put our finger on. Or it can be things that does happen that should not have. And then there's a secondary trauma because we try to make meaning of those things. And usually that is some internalized message of, I don't deserve that, or I do deserve this, I'm bad. Not like I did something wrong, but more something's wrong with me. And another thing that we understand when we're looking at attachment theory is a child is going to attach to their parents. That's just a survival thing. When they're born, if the parents don't attach to them and them attach to the parents, which also helps the parents attach to that infant, if the parents don't attach, that's a life-threatening situation. And we're not differentiating for a long time whether or not these parents, our parents, are healthy for us to attach to, or good for us to attach to, or bad for us to attach to. And kids will attach to their attachment figures. There's also a point at which their approval of us, how they're viewing us, the messages we receive from them, can also feel very much like survival, not just being cared for and fed and changed and given a place to sleep, not just those things that we need for survival, but our parents' approval of us, our parents' messages that they give to us about how they see us in healthy parenting. They're expressing positive things to us about us. But when parenting isn't healthy enough, often our parents aren't helping us make meaning of those things. They're not coming and saying, hey, mommy loves you or daddy loves you. It's not okay that you did this, but I love you. And sometimes a punishment, a lot of times punishment does lead to disconnection. You feel disconnected from your parents because they push you away or they put you in your room and you can't get out of it. but that also gets in the way of our development. So that is the experience. And then that continues during the teen years. I also believe the teen years are an extension, or they are the expression of how the first years of life, how the first, let's say, 10, 11, 12 years of life went. You will see that show up in the teen years. And yes, I think there's developmental things during the teen years. They're starting to understand their development, who they are. They're figuring that out or exploring that. And I think that goes best if parents allow space for that, see that that is something that teens do as part of their healthy development. But if parents don't understand that, or if the first, decade to 12 years did not go well, then you see that during the teen years, and teens can get into a lot of trouble and they can rebel pretty extremely depending on how that looked early on. So that's when we're talking about childhood. How does it show up for adults? I think if that was your experience in childhood, you enter adulthood with that same fear of getting in trouble. Whether that's with your partner, whether that's with a boss or a colleague or a friend. I think a lot of clients, when they're starting therapy, want their therapist to like them. You don't want to get in trouble with your therapist. I had a client a couple weeks ago that I was having a session with, and he's in a place where he's figuring some things out intellectually, and we have good sessions, and he's sharing his insights and his awareness. And I give him other things to consider or teach him psychological principles or things that he's trying to figure out, but he doesn't know the term or the concept. And so in this session, he was saying towards the end, he said, I don't want you to feel like I'm not listening to you or that I'm not valuing what you're telling me because I haven't taken these steps yet. Please don't fire me as a client. If you're going to fire me, please tell me and I'll just do it. And it actually caught me really off guard because I've worked with this client for a while, more than 3 years. And I laughed initially and I said, what? No, I'm not going to fire you. And I said, look, I have no expectation of when the timing's going to be right for you. But I absolutely honor that that timing has to be right for you. And so we can talk about things intellectually and even things emotionally. But at the end of our session, I don't think, oh, next week he's going to come back and he's going to do exactly what I told him to, because that's not how therapy works. That's not how people work. I can't tell you what to do and then you do that. No, you have to do it on your time frame. And so I'll talk to you about this as much as we need to until you're ready to do it, because it has to be not just your learning intellectually, but an emotional learning and an emotional readiness. And so it can be that I'm still afraid of getting in trouble. And yeah, he does have that in his childhood. He got in trouble for a lot of things. And what I find with a lot of clients, including myself, is that some of what they got in trouble for is just kids being kids. It's not them being bad kids. A lot of that has to do with the parents' emotional regulation and how much stress and issues or unresolved trauma is there for the parents. So I think in adulthood, that fear of getting in trouble often comes with it a fear of a similar process that happened in childhood. They might anticipate being rejected or punished for being imperfect, for making a mistake, or for miscommunications, or just for being who they are. There's some common responses from clients when that's happening. Sometimes they're over apologize or they're trying to appease me. They might get defensive or rage and start to go big in order to protect themselves. Or they might go really small and disappear and avoid things, whether that's with the therapist or whether that's with a partner, a friend, a boss, whatever that looks like. Those are common responses that happen. A lot of that is about protecting and trying to be okay. I see this with clients that are sex addicts and they're in the process of being healthier and being accountable and being responsible and being transparent with their partner. Something happens that we're not talking about anything like a relapse or anything close to that, but they just are human and they made a mistake or they forgot something. And they are afraid to tell their partner about that. That's where I might have a conversation with them about, what do you think your partner is going to do? You get to be an imperfect person because we all are. I started a new couple a couple weeks ago that I'm working with that was a referral from a different client. And the husband was talking about wanting to be the perfect husband and the perfect father. And I had said, that made me curious. And so I said, well, nobody can be perfect, right? You cannot be a perfect husband or you cannot be a perfect father. And the good news is that's not necessary. You just have to be good enough. And I did say, it makes me curious where that comes from. Like, why is it so important for you? Like, why is it so important to you that you have to be a perfect father and a perfect husband? Like, tell me a little bit about your father. And he gave me a little bit. He started talking about his dad for, I don't know, 3 minutes. And then he said, but that has nothing to do with this. And it was a first session. So I'm like, okay, yeah, I'm just going to put that on the back burner or keep it in my back pocket. Often the same shame that they felt as a child, it's still there. They usually have not worked on that. They haven't been able to unpack the toxic shame that they're carrying. And so that shame response still gets activated when they think they might have made a mistake or done something wrong or they're going to get in trouble. So, like I said, they might go big and they might deflect or blame. They might try dominating, which usually requires some anger for them to dominate and intimidate. They can also go small. They can start to appease and become that people pleaser. They can try to avoid some things, or they can try to control their emotions so that they're only showing positive emotions. I don't consider emotions negative, but I understand that we have some that are more socially acceptable and some that are not as socially acceptable. And so they might keep suppressing those ones so that they look like everything's fine. I'm happy. Nothing wrong here, nothing to see here. The partner might feel some disconnect or like they're withdrawing because nobody's has a great day all the time and only has happy feelings, right? And at some point that might collapse and then they go big for, and they have a big response. Either of these responses, going big or going small, are about survival. They're about the disconnection from self and sometimes with others or to try to appease the other. And it just creates a paradox of shame. It keeps us stuck in these behaviors and experiences from the past. In the present, it it prevents us from being seen. It prevents us from being known to ourselves, but also to others. And it usually gets in the way of us owning things and being accountable. One of the things that I will tell clients when they're struggling with this concept is adults are going to make mistakes, but they can repair that. They can take accountability. They can be responsible. And I think it's important in order to be a functional adult that you claim your right to make mistakes. You claim your right to be imperfect, especially for clients who struggle with perfectionism. Claiming their right to be imperfect can be relieving. And sometimes they feel, wow, I just get to be me. I'll use one of the phrases that I really like from the AA Big Book. Bill W., in his writing, he was starting to explore emotional sobriety and emotional recovery. And this is just so human, right? We are more likely to see things from our perspective. We have to slow down to see it from another's perspective, even if that's our partner or our child or a friend or a boss. It's so easy for us to just move through the world taking things with our own perspective and not recognizing that somebody else is seeing it different or interpreting it different, making meaning of it differently than us. And so we step on others' toes. I love that analogy of, yeah, sometimes we're just moving through the world being us and we step on somebody's toes. That doesn't make me a bad person. I don't have to fall on my sword apologizing for that. I just say, "Oh, I'm sorry." With some of my clients, they over apologize, which is a way of going small and people pleasing. You know, I think you don't have to go through the world with a broom and dustpan constantly cleaning up behind yourself. And you don't have to lay down in bed at night replaying the day and thinking, "Oh, I shouldn't have said that," or "Oh my gosh, I'm sure that I made them upset," or "Oh, that was so rude." If you were not intending to be rude, let's assume it wasn't rude. If you weren't intending to hurt somebody's feelings, let's assume that their feelings weren't hurt. And if they are, and they come to you and they say that to you, you can have that conversation. Sometimes my clients will say to me, how do I have that conversation? And I'll say, I think you just say, "Oh, thank you for telling me that. That was not my intent at all." Usually we have to acknowledge, I can see how you would have taken it that way. I can see how that would have been an interpretation. But honestly, that was not my response. That does require us to be intentional with the words that we use and responsible with the words that we use. We can't just be saying things that are reckless, because then if somebody comes to us, we might have intended that. We don't know. Our emotions are spread all over the place. And so we're not sure what those emotions are. And I find that this is a struggle for men and for women. I think women do it differently than men. And often women are that we are socialized to be so nice that sometimes even saying what we think, we feel bad about. Sharing your opinion. Oh, we feel so bad about that. And we get to share our opinion. We get to disagree. People get to see things differently. That isn't threatening to us. And a lot of times when they're seeing things differently, that's more about their life experiences and how they've come to view other people, themselves, the world, how they move through the world. All of those types of things are going on. When I'm working with couples, I try to get them to see, hey, both of you are complex people. You both got into this relationship with this narrative and these life experiences, for good or bad. They can see, like, oh, yeah, I was given a viewpoint that is not transferable to everybody. It might be transferable to some people, but I can't transfer this to all men. I can't transfer this to all women. It's not that generalizable. Generalizable. I don't know if that's a word, but I do use it. I should probably look that up. I think being a functional adult requires, in those moments, to get curious instead of going into that shame. And for some people, we have to unpack some of that shame and reduce the hold that it has on the individual. But we have to have some awareness about the shame, even if it comes up for us again, if we've kind of packed it and laid it aside, knowing that's not my shame. And just us being an imperfect human being, we don't have to be ashamed of that. We're going to make mistakes. We can acknowledge that. And it's not the end of the world to say, "Oh, yeah, I can totally see how, given your story, that would have landed that way." And in the moment, I was not thinking about that. I didn't take that into consideration. I would have used different words had I been seeing it from your point of view. I just, in my own point of view, we can say a lot of things to each other when we're coming in safe, which means emotionally regulated. We have unpacked enough toxic shame where we know that somebody approaching us about our mistakes, about our imperfections, is not a threat. We're not going to get grounded. We're not going to have our driving privileges taken away. Those things happened in your childhood, in your teen years. I don't think my kids had a negative experience with consequences or punishments. We gave them consequences. I'm trying to think if we gave them punishments. I think we just called it consequences. Sometimes that was timeout. We did use timeout, but more in a way of giving them time to emotionally regulate. Daughter number 2 loved reading in elementary school. Actually, not just in elementary school. She loved reading. And I know she still reads books often. And so for her, if we put her in timeout, she'd go to her room and she'd read. And you know what? That emotionally regulated her. And it wasn't necessarily a punishment. I wasn't trying to make them cry or feel horrible. It was about getting emotional regulation. So she'd go in her room and read. That's fine. And when she, was done reading or she came out for a snack or something, she was a lot better. She was emotionally regulated. Daughter number 1, she would draw. She liked to read too. I would say daughter number 3 and 4 were the hardest. Daughter number 3 didn't read. She reads now, but she made it all the way K through 12 without reading a book. And a lot of that was she doesn't sit still. She has a lot of energy. She still has a lot of energy. She's better at entertaining herself now. But when she was a kid in elementary school, if she stopped, it was hard to get her to stop moving and going and having all this energy during her waking hours. But she struggled to stay awake past 7. When she got a job at a kids hospital here in the state, it was one of her internships. She was working at a kids hospital, and her first shift was midnight. And she's in her early 20s. She's 25 now. So this was last year. And my husband and I were like, oh, you've never stayed awake till midnight. Like, can you even drive at midnight? We were concerned. One of the doctors later in her life talked about like maybe she has some type of narcolepsy. I don't understand enough about narcolepsy, but when she is asleep, she's gone. There's no waking her up. And so we were concerned about her, even if she could work till midnight. We're like, oh, I don't know that that's a smart idea, that you're in a medical situation where you have to be responsible and it's after 8 p.m. She did make the transition. Well, no car crashes. But if it is not a night that she's working late, and the job she got after she graduated, she's in the OR a lot. And so she doesn't tend to be late unless she picks up a shift PRN at the primary children's hospital. But otherwise, if she's not working, she's in bed by 8 to this day. She's a good time, just not at night. And so she was hard. She didn't go to timeout very well. She was the one, I think I've talked before, that I would have to go in the room. Me or my husband would have to go in the room, and we'd sit with our back against her door so she couldn't go out and continue to bother her sisters or kick them or whatever. And she would jump on the bed. She'd crawl up and down us. And we just had to sit and emotionally regulate, stay regulated, because, that's hard to do when you've had it with her, because she's been causing a lot of trouble between her and her sisters. And then she'd eventually calm down, and she'd end up laying across my lap, and she wanted me to scratch her back. And then I knew, okay, we're regulated. But wow, did we have to get out a lot of energy. So she did not read, hence daughter number 4 did not read. They always tested at reading level. I think one of the reasons daughter number 4 didn't read us because daughter number three didn't want her to, because then who could she play with or who could she bother? So they all read now and they enjoy reading. But it was just different how we had to regulate them and what kind of consequences they had. As they were older teens, during the teen years, I remember sitting in, it was a church class, and I was a teacher, but I wasn't teaching that week, that Sunday. And my second and third daughters were in the same class. I was teaching their age group from 16 to 18. So one of them was 16, one of them was 17. And I think the lesson was on obedience. And I don't know that I would say my kids are the most obedient. If they see the need for a rule, they absolutely can follow that. But it's more of an internal guide that they have rather than because somebody said so. And my husband and I both tried not to say because we said so when they were growing up. And so we're in this church class on Sunday, and the teacher's teaching on obedience. And so he asked the girls, what type of rules do you guys have at your house? And I'm sitting there thinking, what rules do we have? What rules do we have? Like hard and fast rules that if you break it, you'll get in trouble, she had asked. And I'm like, okay, what do we have? And I'm coming up blank. Oh, how's that going to look? The therapist has no rules. Like, And people would make comments to me sometimes if my kids had said something like not inappropriate, but just advocated for themselves in a way. They'd be like, oh, well, we know whose kid they are. It wasn't in a flattering way. And I'm watching my two kids, they were sitting next to each other and they're talking back and forth. And they were the last that the teacher had asked, like, okay, what are the rules at the pack house? And daughter number two is like, I don't think we have hard and fast rules. And the teacher says, I don't believe that. Your mom has to have rules for you guys. And I'm still drawing a blank. I'm like, and then daughter number three says, well, I think probably the hard and fast rule at our house is we have to talk about it. And when she said that, I was like, oh, yeah, that is the rule. Especially during the teen years. So we do timeout. But again, it wasn't intended to punish them or shame them. And as teens, if they misbehaved, we talked about it. What was going on? Why do you think you did that? What's your part in this? How could you have handled that better? We talked about a lot of things. And I don't know that there was any other hard and fast rule. The teacher even said to them, like, you guys don't have a curfew? And they said, well, kind of, but it's not hard and fast. It varies. And there's exceptions. And what I found is we were actually teaching our kids to take accountability. What's your part? What could you have done better? It was literally teaching them accountability. So I think functional adults can take accountability and are taught to take accountability. And taking accountability isn't the worst thing in the world. I know if I had conflict with my mom, and I mean the conflict, if I miss curfew, even by less than 5 minutes, if I was less than 5 minutes late on my curfew, and my mom never fell asleep, she was up until we got home. So if I was 5 minutes late on my curfew, in that 5 minutes, my mom had gotten so angry. And we would have easy a 2 to 3 hour fight about how disrespectful that is. And there were times, I would never say this to her, but in those fights, there were times where I'm thinking, I could not drive and somebody else's parents pick me up, and maybe they're picking up, 5 kids, and then they're dropping us all off at home. I'm not going to tell them, drop me off first and then go drop everybody else. I might be the furthest house to drop me off. And I wasn't going to speak up about that. And also, it was not my mom picking me up to make sure that I could keep curfew. I never said that because that would not go over well and probably just add time to the fight. And so a lot of times in fighting with her, it felt like, first of all, there was going to be some time period that you had to endure. I guess that she thought I don't know what her intention was. But then you had to apologize. And apologizing with my mom felt like you're a bad person. And you 100% had to own that you were a bad person. And it wasn't like, here's my part and here's mom's part. No, it was all on me. My mom did nothing wrong. Even this 3-hour fight, nothing wrong. And I have to own all of that. And so, needless to say, starting to learn how to take accountability in other areas of my life or even apologize didn't come naturally to me because it felt like I was apologizing for being. And I didn't want that for my kids. And I didn't think that hard punishment really made me a better person. And so I didn't think I needed to do that for my kids. I didn't feel like that's what makes people responsible or accountable. So I think functional adults can also be teachable. Sometimes we're disagreeing, and it is totally okay to say, that's not a perspective I've considered. I'm going to think about that. I think we should be open to ideas that aren't ours. And maybe we think about it, we look into it, we do some reading, and we decide, I don't think that's accurate, or I don't know that that's how I feel about that. I think that's fine. I think it's okay to have this attitude that I'm open, I'm teachable. People might have a different perspective that makes sense to me that I don't have. So functional adults can take accountability, they can be teachable, and they can repair instead of collapsing. They can say, oh my gosh, I totally forgot. I'm so sorry. They can say, I totally messed up there without being like, I am a complete mess up and I should not be trusted. That's not what that means. It might have felt that way to you as a kid, but that is going to get in the way of you being a functional adult. The other thing that I talk about, and I used to talk about it more with the therapist that I was training and supervising for licensure, but I've started sharing it with my clients because I feel like we're at this place. It's just helpful for them to know. And that is that the absence of the negative doesn't equal competency, capacity, or skills. So let me talk about what I mean by that. So let's say that this is how things were in childhood, and we walked away from our childhood and teen years with a lot of toxic shame. And now we're not experiencing toxic shame the way that we did as a kid. We are not being grounded or being denied things because of our behavior. And so everybody in the family gets to go do this and you don't get to. So maybe those things aren't happening anymore. That doesn't mean that we learned the skills that we should have learned when we did things wrong or we made mistakes in childhood. I will ask clients, when trauma was happening for you, what do you feel like you didn't learn that you might have learned had this trauma or this experience or the way that your parents responded not been that way? And often it comes down to, like, they might give me a couple of examples, but usually it comes down to, I think I would have learned how to emotionally regulate and understand my emotions better. And I probably would have had some conflict resolution skills. And I don't think I do. I freeze, or I get big and I get defensive, or one of my clients used to say, I act like it's the end of the world. And I know that's a big response for a lot of situations, but I do that. I'm not talking about personality traits per se, although some of those may have had to be stifled to people please, or we might have overdeveloped some personality traits instead of developing those in a helpful, balanced way. In the 12-step programs, the 4-step inventory, they're looking for character flaws. They ask you to take an inventory of your character flaws. Most of my clients who are in 12-step programs, their sponsor gives them some type of guideline for what kind of inventory they want them to take. And I've had some clients who hear that term character defect and they hear it as a negative thing. And sometimes that delays them ever doing the 4-step inventory. And so I will say, okay, how about we soften the term character defect? Or actually, how about we put it in perspective and we broaden the way we look at character defects? So if we were to say, you got in trouble a lot and you were made to feel like something inherently was wrong with you and you did not deserve praise or love or attention. How we develop our personality, it's not going to be balanced because our experiences were not happening in the middle area. They're happening the extremes. And so our anger may have developed and it's too extreme. When we get angry, it's too easy to go all the way to rage. That would be a character defect. That doesn't mean anger itself is a bad thing. I think anger can be a healthy emotion, depending on how balanced it is and our experience with it and what it means to us. I found with my kids that each came with a different personality. I watched that develop. They were young, like the first year of life. I watched some of that come into existence and that's still a part of them today and how they are. And I don't think we're trying to stigmatize those or pathologize those traits. But when we are developing and trauma is happening as part of our development, I think we're more likely to have certain skills that we either dial up so that it's out of balance or we dial down so we're safe or we're protected. One of these examples that I often use with clients is humor can be a character defect. I mean, these clients usually are funny, they are witty, but initially I see it, whether that's an individual or sometimes when they start their group work, you'll see it as a way of deflecting away from their emotions, deflecting away from something difficult. And I probably developed that way for necessary reasons. But we can also have conversations about, and often they'll acknowledge this with the group, so the group can help them have awareness around this. I'll say to them, it's fine if you are witty and make a joke and make people laugh, but can you come back to what we're talking about or to what the question was and actually let yourself go a little bit deeper emotionally? And they do that. And I think when humor is dialed in, it is a strength of theirs. It actually connects people and then deepens that intimacy that they have with each other, that closeness that they have. So I think humor can be out of balance. And I've seen clients figure out how to dial that in a way that is actually a strength of theirs. Healing the shame from getting in trouble as a child means that we do not fear our imperfection. We know it's there. We're comfortable with it being there. We work with it. We can acknowledge it. And we can get to the place that if somebody in our adult life reacts similar to how our parents did and acts as though this is the most horrible thing in the world, we don't necessarily have to agree with them. It doesn't automatically tip us into shame anymore. And we can see, oh, this may be about them. Maybe they have perfection issues, and me acknowledging imperfection led to that reaction. We can better know what is ours. We can better know what is not ours. We know how to work with our imperfections, own our imperfections without toxic shame coming up. I want to ask you some reflective questions for you. If you've been listening to this episode, one of those that I frequently will ask clients is, where in your life do you feel like you might get in trouble when it's at an extreme like that with addiction? There's certainly more to be accountable for. There's certainly some reasons to look at why the imperfections go to that level. and explore that with a professional. I think that's helpful because we're not aware of the trauma that's underlying that. And then another question that I ask is, what's your go-to shame response? Is that going big or is that going small? I think it's helpful as you're starting to understand this concept of adults don't get in trouble. And I'm not talking about breaking laws that then there's legal consequences, because I think that's part of being accountable. I the consequences of their choices can be severe. They might have to spend some time in jail or in prison. As a therapist, my hope is they get some help before it gets to that level of doing something that crosses a line where there will be legal consequences. But I think initially it's helpful to notice when you feel like a kid, whether that's in conflict that's happening now, or whether that's something that you're aware of that you haven't told somebody, whether that's a boss or a coworker or your partner or a friend. And part of the silence about that is because you feel like you're going to get in trouble. And just start reminding yourself, and just start reminding yourselves, I'm not in trouble. This is a process. I do need to be accountable, and I get to be imperfect. You're growing. You are allowed to make mistakes and still belong. I think when we stop trying to avoid punishment and we start learning, that's when we really start to understand and move deeper into functional adulthood. Functional adulthood is still not perfection. It is being present. It's ownership. And it's the ability to stay in the room with yourself and with others when things get hard. Even if we have to take a pause and come back, we're staying in it. And we're doing what we can to help move through. And that starts to change everything. Thank you for listening today. If this episode resonated with you, I'd love for you to share it with somebody that you think needs to hear it. And if you're ready to do deeper work around shame, whether that's in parenting or it gets in the way of your emotional regulation, I will be offering a workshop coming up this fall. So if you have not already, hit subscribe. It costs you nothing, but it really helps the algorithm. And it alerts you to new information, which if you're interested in some of these workshops, I will be putting them out there. And that's how you make sure that it comes up in what you're viewing. So please hit subscribe. I would really appreciate it. For those of you who already have, I really appreciate that. And at the end of this episode, I want to remind you, your story matters. Remember there is something meaningful in every chapter. Don't wait to share your story until it's finished. Until next time, Jackie.